Hello ladies, and welcome back to Thankful Thriftiness. Back in the fall, I published a video on cozy autumn reads, and today I want to share with you some winter books, or books I feel are easier to read during the winter. These are generally longer books, or books in series, or books that are more themed towards winter. I find that I like to read more during the winter, and I can commit better to reading a series or a lengthier classic. Instead of dividing this video into different genres of book, I've divided it into age groups to make it a little easier to navigate, especially for younger readers. Although I may say it's for an age group, especially for younger people watching this video, I highly recommend that you consult your parents on whatever you're reading, because they know best what you can handle and they know what is best for you to be learning. We're going to start with children's books. Now, if you're an older reader, don't think that you might not enjoy these books too. We're just starting at the youngest level you can read, and I enjoy a lot of these books personally even now. The first series I want to recommend is the Little House on the Prairie series. These books are probably familiar to many of you, and a lot of you probably grew up watching the Little House on the Prairie TV show. These books are very different from the show, so I recommend that you read them regardless of whether or not you think you know the story of Laura Ingalls Wilder. These books follow her from when she was a child all the way up until she was an adult and having her own children. These books aren't so factual that they're technically an autobiography, but it does tell a lot of stories from her life. I recommend for parents with very young children that you read through them first. There are a couple of stories, especially in I think the first book, Little House in the Big Woods, that could frighten small readers, so I just highly recommend that you read through them first. What my mom did is she just would use whiteout to white out certain sections or tape a piece of paper over the top of it, and it worked pretty well. These books are awesome to inspire girls in homemaking and boys in adventure. I think it's fair to say that boys and girls could read this, probably more leaning towards girls. Next, for children's books, we have the YWAM books. These, oops, they're upside down. There are so many of these. If you're a homeschooling family, you need these books. And if you're not a homeschooling family, I highly recommend them just the same. But for homeschooling, they can even be used as curriculum, as these are biographies and stories of real men and women throughout history. They feel like you're just reading a story, but it's all factual. It's crazy. I don't even know how they do it, but they're absolutely wonderful. My husband found a sale for these over Christmas, and they also were selling these children's books, which are like hardcover kids' picture books with the same stories, but for even younger readers. So I highly recommend you look into these as well. My siblings and I have spent hours reading these books, doing schoolwork, but it didn't feel like schoolwork. They're great to use for book reports, read alouds, and just personal private reading. They're also great as an adult, things I've either forgotten or I never read about. It also feels very much like a productive read because you're getting so much information. For winter themed books for children, I have a couple of ones that I love so much. This is Miracles on Maple Hill. This book follows the story of a family who moves out to the country after the father, I believe, fights in World War II. And they help out on a maple tree farm and end up running it for a while. And it's just a really good read aloud or an individual read, but I think it's a better read aloud. My mom read it to us, I think a couple times, and it's just such a pleasant story with good lessons in it, and a good story of family coming together and figuring things out. The last children's book I have to recommend to you is Mr. Popper's Penguins. If you've seen the movie, it's not the same thing. This is a very different story. Honestly, I think the only correlation between the movie and the book is that there are penguins involved. But it's a really sweet read, definitely one you want to have in your collection. My first recommendation for preteen and teen readers is The Chronicles of Narnia. As you can see, I don't have them all here, but I have the first, well, not first two. I have a couple of them, and I'd like to collect the rest eventually. They're very exciting reads. I find them to be great adventure books. Also a good Christian read because it's really neat to see the correlation between Christianity and what happens in Narnia, be it Aslan the lion being kind of the savior of that world. It's just kind of cool. I would recommend it for, like I said, preteen on up, depending upon the parent's discretion because there is some magic involved, although I think it's mild compared to other books. It just depends upon what your family believes about all that. So I think for teenagers, it's definitely a safe read. And the movies, I really enjoy the movies. Some people hate them, although they like the books, but it's up to you. They're a classic. They were written in, I think, the 40s by C.S. Lewis, who also wrote Mere Christianity and a bunch of other Christian literature. I will say, I'm not a fan of The Lord of the Rings. I've read that as well. So if you read The Lord of the Rings and think, oh, I won't like Narnia because I didn't like The Lord of the Rings, this is very different. So I recommend you give it a shot either way. The next recommendation I have for teen readers on up is the At Home in Mitford books. It's a series of books that follows the life of a priest who lives in the small town of Mitford and the lives of the people who live there. I find that they're very peaceful to read, and I quite enjoy watching the characters develop, hearing the different stories, but it's not super stressful at all. It's a very peaceful read. Nothing too crazy happens, and so I find it a good Sunday afternoon activity to just sit and read for a while. One of my personal favorites lately, and one I hope to eventually do a video actually reviewing and taking wisdom from, is Mrs. Dunwoody's Excellent Instructions for Homekeeping. Although Mrs. Dunwoody did not actually exist, this book is written by someone who compiled a bunch of wisdom and advice and just homekeeping knowledge from women who lived in the South during the 1800s and maybe a little bit later, like early 1900s. This book contains practical wisdom on homekeeping, relationships. It includes recipes and even instructions for how to make your own homemade cleaners. Every chapter has little bits of wisdom like this one. Take time to learn and cater to frequent guests' preferences and habits. Make notes of these things as well as their favorite foods so that you may surprise and delight them upon their return. I wish I did things like this, and this book is just full of ideas on how to make your home a more welcoming, inviting place, a place your family wants to come back to, and a place where you can be a gracious host. Ben-Hur is one of my favorite classics, and as you can see, it's a pretty thick book. So I find that winter would probably be the best time to read this one, unless you're an avid reader during the summers. This story follows the life of a young Jewish prince named Ben-Hur during the time of Jesus. Throughout the book, he is accused of a crime he did not commit. He's then enslaved. He's then adopted by a Roman official, and I'm not going to spoil the rest of the story, but it involves a lot of chariot racing. If you've seen the movie, you definitely like the book. Not certain you'd like the movie if you read the book, but it is a solid read, and it's really neat to read something that takes place during the life of Jesus. This book is a special read to me because throughout it, Jesus appears as a character several times in just little ways that a normal person back then might have run into Jesus and seen the love he had for the people he came to save. I will not spoil the ending because it is so good and it makes me cry every single time. When I was thinking of Christian books to read this winter, two came to mind. One is The Brave-Hearted Gospel by Eric Ludy, which I highly recommend for teenagers to read at some point. For me personally, it really awakened a passion to share the gospel and to believe it with my whole heart, to really trust my entire being to the Lord. I think a lot of people have this perception of the gospel and Christianity as more like happy, fluffy, light, and which causes even atheists to not really take it seriously, but it is not. It is such a beautiful story of how the God of the universe came down and saved us from this state we're in, the state of sin, the state of destruction. The second is Revive Our Hearts devotionals. They have many of these. I have Esther. My mom has their Advent devotional. It's a day-by-day one. These are very convicting Bible studies. They really make you dive deeper into the Word of God on your own. They don't give you all the answers, and they ask the tough questions that we should be asking ourselves every day. They also have a podcast, which I will link below. By the way, I will link all these books below if I can find them. Last but certainly not least, my classics recommendation to you for the winter is to read through Charles Dickens' novels. I like Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, and A Tale of Two Cities, although I know he has more. I'm not as familiar with them, so I probably won't recommend them because he was an interesting writer. But those three I've really enjoyed reading through multiple times, and I would recommend for teenagers to read. To be on the safe side, I'd say maybe ages 15 on up should read these. He wrote darker books, and it was a dark time in history, but the stories can be kind of sad. In the end, they all end well though, so that is the nice part, but just be careful with classics, especially ones like these. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any winter book recommendations, please share them in the comments below, and I look forward to getting some more ideas for my own reading. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week. See ya!